Hey everyone, and welcome into the Reload podcast. Along with Nathan Gilsleider and Marshall Scott, I'm Justin Southwell. Guys, we made it. Football's here, or at least camp. Camp starts, and Nathan, was 2008. Got to take you a little ways back. I started in 2009, but explain the feeling of what these guys are going through right now. I know that there are some things that are completely different in college football, but I would imagine that the feeling that these guys are feeling right now is very similar to what you felt that first summer.
Yeah, I mean, they've been going this whole summer, right? They've been getting after it all through the weeks, all conditioning and lifting and it's like that anxious energy. You're kind of starting to turn that page, right? Getting ready to first couple days there'll be shoulder pads and helmets or helmets only, and then after that it's live, and then you realize really quickly like you had your opportunities in this, like everybody was getting reps in the spring and everybody's getting these things, right? And then it's like those things dry up real quick in the fall. And so it gets real really quick. And I would imagine even more so like in the climate that we're at with how much guys are getting paid and even maybe sitting certain guys on certain days, keeping, you know what I'm saying? Like there's gonna be a little bit of different feel, but in the end it's a lot of excitement, a lot, that first day. It's cool. Like today we check in and you do all the things, and I'm sure Coach Morse does it a lot different than Coach Gundy did. But you check in, you'd have your big team meeting, you'd have the freshmen and all the new guys get up and learn the songs and the chants, and it's like, hey, this is what we're singing when we win. This is the alma mater, yada yada yada. And it was just like, all right, here we are. Let's do this thing. So it's a fun time because what I think a lot of people don't understand is like you literally work for 9 months to play for three. And so it's like, all right, we're inching closer, and it's exciting.
I think maybe people are starting to feel that because it seems like Eric Morris and these guys have been in Stillwater for a long time, and we just haven't seen any action. We're itching for it. So I am excited about that. Marshall, how about you? What does it look like from your perspective, running pistols firing and getting to see these guys reporting for camp?
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I'll be there tomorrow morning. We're getting in for I think the first 15 minutes or so, and the first 15 minutes of Moore's practice and Gundy practice have been a little bit different. At least in the spring they were. I don't know that'll be just sort of interesting to sort of continue to watch, and obviously you just get the feeling, and everybody's excited about it. They put out these sort of hype videos. The one we're recording this on Tuesday night. The one 2 nights ago where the beat drops on the Josh Pate could go boom or whatever. That's enough to get you juiced. And then today, with all the guys showing up, they released that video again. So yeah, it's sort of starting to feel like football is here again. We get excited about this every year. The last 2 years, we've got excited just to get punched, directly in the face whenever we're watching the product. But yeah, there's a renewed energy around. There's a renewed energy around for sure.
And with some of that renewed energy, we were kind of kicking around some ideas as far as what our podcast is going to look like over the next couple of weeks, and sounds like Megapod is going to be coming back. But until we get to that point, we were kind of kicking around ideas as far as what are some of the biggest questions that we've got heading into camp. And so I've got 5 questions for us to discuss today. Let's get started with this one. Who and what will OSU get at offensive line? Nathan, let's let you kick this one off.
I wrote that question, by the way, and it made no sense whatsoever. Good thing I don't write for a living, but I think everybody got the gist.
Yeah. um we've got a lot of shiny toys and a lot of sports cars on the outside, and everybody's really really excited. You've got a really really high level quarterback that everyone's excited to see that next level. None of that works if you don't have a above average offensive line. It just doesn't. You can't run 7-step drops. You can't do, you can't not have a guy chipping on the backside if you don't trust the left tackle, or you know what I'm saying. Like you really eliminate so much of your playbook, and we saw it. Obviously, we've seen it a lot over the last 2 years when you're unable to do things like that. but it changes everything. And so for me, like this question of who are the five going to be? What's that alignment going to look like? What are the swing guys? How are we going to set this up? I think it's a pretty deep position, at least two ones and twos. I feel pretty confident that can at least compete and get the job done. But this is another one of those things where, like, yes, we brought over, I think, three offensive linemen from UNT, and one of them that was at UNT then went to Kansas and is now most likely going to be the starting center. Like, that's a jump. There's probably no bigger jump when you go from those conferences or even like somebody to the SEC or the Big Ten than in the inside. Defensive line, offensive line. Those are the biggest jumps when you start moving yourself up. And so I'm really interested on what that's going to look like. And we saw some in the spring where some guys kind of bounced around a little bit. We also saw where like the new Michigan State transfer, like he didn't do much in the spring. He was kind of injured and banged up, and so what's that going to look like? Coach Morris kind of hinted at it at Big 12 media days that you're going to have probably him at right tackle, and then they are going to most likely give the OU transfer Sexton probably the first shot at left tackle, and then we know that Mercer's going to probably be the starting center, and probably Johnny Dixon at one of the guards, and maybe we'll see who the other guard is. But until we get out there, we just don't know, because there is a lot of moving parts in this, and it is for my money, it's the most important position group on this team, because they're going to set the floor and the ceiling of this offense.
Yeah, sort of, co-sign everything you said there. It's going to be, I think there are six guys for five spots. What I think it's going to come down to. You mentioned Mercer at center. I think that's essentially a lock. But then outside of that, there's sort of like tackle heavy. Jacob Sexton, you mentioned, probably going to play tackle. Braden Nelson, one of the UNT transfers, he was really good left tackle for North Texas last season. Lepo's a tackle. Joseph Hansen was a tackle. Those four guys, I could see all of those guys, playing. And then you also mentioned Johnny Dixon, who I've got slotted in at one of the guards. So, it's going to be, Mercer's going to be, I'm pretty sure, the center, and then it's going to be four of Sexton, Nelson, Dixon, Lepo, and Hansen. In what order and where are those guys playing? I'm honestly not sure, but I think that they'll probably, I sort of like that they're bouncing around in the spring, and let's really sort of anchor down where these guys best fit this offense.
I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but back in the day, but quite honestly, when Oklahoma State has had its best offensive lines, and you can talk about the Zach Robinson era, the Brandon Whedon era, I think those probably are two most. You had guys that could play multiple positions at really high levels, and it didn't necessarily mean like the ones and then the twos, and that guy stepped up. It was like if a one got hurt, well then maybe you moved over your left guard to right tackle, and whatever configuration that we came up with. And I think that's really where we had the depth, and we've seen over the last handful of years, even the Spencer Sanders era. If one of those guys went out, that was our starters. It fell off fast, and I don't see that being the case. Marshall, you brought it up, right? That's a lot of tackles, but we know that one of the things I brought up is probably moving Hansen inside, and a couple other people. Well, we know that he can just easily move outside and probably adequately get it done. While he may not be the best option, right? And so that's something that I'm really excited about with this group, but. It all starts there. It always has. The game of football will always start there. Can you stop something, and can you get something going inside? And if you can, then the outside starts working.
Yeah, I think it's always better to have too many tackles rather than too many guards. No offense to any of the guards out there, but I think you'd just rather have more tackles.
Yeah, it's interesting. Going back in the day, right? I think Oklahoma State never really had one of the premier lines in the Big 12. A lot of credit was given to Joe Wickline, and rightfully so. A lot of those guys were undersized and they played smart and still got the job done. Where I think that maybe we benefited was when we brought in Holgerson, Munkin after that, running these offenses where there were schemes where you're backing up to do your pass protection, and you didn't necessarily have to have that aggressive action all the time. You're able to get the ball out quickly, kind of preserve some of your offensive line a little bit. And then whenever you're ready for an explosive run play, you've got a little bit more energy. You've got the strength to push forward through that and maybe knock them off balance a little bit. So I think with that tree coming from, Eric Morris coming from Mike Leach and kind of that same type of philosophy potentially, we might see a resurgence of that where maybe we got away from it a little bit whenever Dunn was the offensive coordinator. So Nathan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. And you've seen it in recruiting with Coach Morse. It's a completely different body type that he wants in an offensive lineman than what we had previously recruited, even by choice. Coach Gundy wanted more athletic guys that could really get out and move on screens and do a lot of that and be multiple on the line for the run game and be able to do multiple things. To your point, and Tech was huge when Coach was there, and but they weren't super athletic, but they could pass protect all day long. And that's something they did. They went wider splits. Baylor started doing that whenever they went through a really good era there with RG3 and so on. And when Art Briles was there, you go wider splits, bigger bodies, and longer arms, so you can reach and you can get there, and you're not asking as much from the offensive line movement wise. Now, Coach Morse is a much better running football coach than Texas Tech ever was. But that being said, these are still much bigger bodies than we have had at Oklahoma State in the last decade. And you're talking, right tackle 6'5", left tackle 6'5", both guards 6'4", 6'5", center 6'3", 6'4". And the guys that we're recruiting, I think almost all of them are 6'4" and above. And so it is different, and that's a good thought process, and it's something that Coach Gundy really, really liked, and he thought that allowed him to be multiple. Kind of we talked about having a guy that has better feet and maybe can move a little bit better, but maybe he's 20 pounds lighter than you'd like him. Well, I can put him right tackle. I can put him at right guard. I can switch him over. Maybe you can play backup center. You know what I mean? Um, I think of a guy like a Grant Garner back in the day, or an Andrew Lewis, right? Kind of unheralded, had to grow into that body that they got to, and they were still kind of a little bit undersized, right? Not NFL guys, but fantastic college linemen, and that's kind of where Coach Gundy lived. Coach Morse is going for a much bigger body, and it's evident.
Just sort of putting a bow on that. Ashton Lepo, who we've got sort of slotted in at right tackle, 6'7", 320 pounds. Jacob Sexton, 6'6", 328. The Indiana State transfer, 6'8", 327. That's a lot of human. Redshirt sophomore. I don't really recall, seeing him in the mix of things, but maybe one to watch in the future. There's a 6'8" guy walking around.
Must be nice to be able to reach things on the top shelf.
Oh, I've got one more. Just while we're talking about offensive line play, in 2010 and 2011, OSU gave up a combined 22 sacks. In 2016 and 2017, OSU gave up a combined 56 sacks. Mason Rudolph still had better statistics than Brandon Whedon. Let's move on to the next one.
Sounds like he hung onto the ball a little bit too long. Question 2. I'm just kidding, Mason. Love you. Question
Ditto,
2.
Brandon Wheat.
Will Mestemaker take a leap? And by that we mean, obviously, coming up from G6 to Division I and Power 4 conference to essentially, hopefully, lead the Big 12 and potentially the nation. Will he take the leap? Marshall, let's start with you.
And this is such a cop-out answer, but I certainly think the potential is there. It goes back to he basically did last season on no prior experience. He had that bowl game the year before. He played a couple times the year before, but then that was like it for him, actually playing the position in actual games. So, the fact that he could do that so fresh after that, and now he's got a year's worth of film to sort of look back on. And, we mentioned his comments at Big 12 Media Days, saying that there were times that he felt he could have been more aggressive last year looking back at the film. So, I certainly think that given the fact that he doesn't have a ton of experience and he had the year that he had last year, and now he gets to watch that year in film all off season. I think that I think he's ready to take the step. And I've been watching. I've been going back and doing a little series for the blog, just going back and watching North Texas's games, and I'm 2 games in, and holy crap, it's it's a different breed of quarterback that, and I obviously have watched him Drew Mestamaker since he's committed, but just going back and watching every single snap of a TV copy, I'm like, you know what, I think this guy is pretty good, and I'm really excited to sort of see what it looks like in orange.
I'm more bullish on him making a jump, even with the jump of the level, because of how little he's played overall in his life at the position. But he's been with the same quarterback coach and the same coach for these 3 years. And so you're not asking him to do all of that all at once, which you're seeing very often. I think that really is going to help him out. When you talk about making the jump, like what does that look like? I think it's pretty tough to say, like, statistically speaking, just to continue to grow from where he was at statistically, especially yards. But I think the biggest thing for me, and we've talked about it a little bit, is cutting down the turnovers. It wasn't like he had a ton, but in the 2 biggest games of the year last season, I think he had 6 combined turnovers, or possibly even 7. That right? 6 or 7. Those are things that are almost directly tied to the maturation process of a quarterback. I remember living through the young Spencer Sanders era, and unfortunately, it never really stopped with Spencer, but especially when he was young, really turned the ball over a ton. But 34 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. I mean, that's a pretty darn good ratio in considering that he still led the nation in passing and it was at 69% completion percentage. And so I don't know if you're saying, like, well, he needs to throw for 5,000 yards next season to make the leap. That's probably not fair. But for me, the leap comes from just overall control and maturation and cutting the turnovers. If you're talking about he's going in next year and he's throwing 30 plus touchdowns with 4 to 5, 6 interceptions, that's a big jump for me. And I think that that's what we need, because even with the Alan Bowman era in quarterback, like, he turned the ball over too much. And I mean, I can't get on anybody last year because we had a wide receiver, but yeah, I think he's poised to do it. Like you said, Marshall, he's got a lot of tools and a lot of toys, and it's up to him. But I'm really bullish on his process, and I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, sort of just adding some context to what you mentioned. So he threw 3 against USF, and then he threw 3 in the conference championship game against Tulane. He threw 2 in the bowl game against San Diego State, 1 against Charlotte, and then none in what is that? So he threw picks in 4 of his games. He just sort of saved them all for those 4 games.
I am by no means trying to be a contrarian here, because I absolutely believe that he will make the leap. However, if I were to voice any kind of concern, it would be that the Big 12 defenses have gotten better over the years. And you've mentioned Spencer Sanders, Nathan. It's kind of like whenever he emerged as QB1 and was dealing with kind of this new wave of defenses in the Big 12, the perception out there is that the Big 12 defenses aren't good at all. I think you can even look back at 2021 Oklahoma State to prove that that's not the case. While we don't have any defenses, I don't think, at that level in the Big 12, I also don't believe that they're complete slouches on that side of the ball in this conference. So I do wonder about that, how he can translate, because when he was at North Texas, it seemed like the level of competition and the schedule that they played was just, I mean, it's at that lower level. It is what it is. Now, you add on to that we've got Oregon week 2, and they're going to have one of the top defenses in the country, and they've got athletes flying around all over the place. I'm confident that Mestamaker is going to be able to process things quickly, a lot more quickly than what we've had at quarterback probably in the last decade, and potentially even better. So I am excited about that, but I do wonder if potentially if there's a game against Oregon that doesn't really go great, if that shakes his confidence. He hasn't really had any kind of test like that, and I would hate for it to kind of get in his head and linger and prolong things for the rest of the upcoming games, and that turns into a whole ordeal. So there are a lot of questions around that, but in confidence, I believe Mestmaker can make this leap. I just have a little bit of reservation based on some of the context around his situation.
And I think you brought up a good point. I think that is the question of the leap, right? I think that's what we're like saying, will he make it? Because I think that's part of it. When you're going to have those games, you're going to have those tough moments, right? You're going to throw 2 interceptions in the first half, on passes you shouldn't have thrown. So is that second half going to be the same thing, or are you going to be mature enough and have that goldfish mindset and just keep slinging it in the second half, knowing that it's going to be better? I believe, and you've heard Coach Morris talk about it. And one thing for me is he doesn't appear to be like a really vocal leader, right? But he made a comment at
Not
the Big 12, not rah-rah. But he made a comment at the Big 12 media days how one of the things that he's grown most in confidence was, and Justin, you and I both understand this very well. If you're not out there making plays and doing all the things, it's very difficult to be a leader for your team. And so when he came from not having a scholarship to playing in that one game the year before, then all of a sudden playing all those games, he didn't naturally come in with that bravado and like, hey, I'm going to take over this team. This is my huddle. This is this and this is that. But I think the way that he talked and the way that Coach Morris talked about him, I think he's realizing that he's earned the right now to do that and to be that guy. And so I think that for me is one of the bigger questions of the leap. Is he going to be able to? And I believe so, but that's yet to be seen.
Do you think that translates to this level? As what I mean is, like, he has that mindset because of what he was able to do at North Texas. And if he were to continue to play for North Texas going into this year, I think that absolutely rings true. But now it's kind of like you're starting fresh again with a new team, a new conference. Do you think that confidence will translate and carry over, or do you think he'll kind of maybe struggle with that?
I think that's where something like the Manning Passing Academy is so crucial for a guy like him. Like we talked about, right? It's like, one of the greatest realizations he had is like, I can do everything that these guys can do. Doesn't matter what sticker's on my helmet. And I think all athletes and all extremely high level athletes have this incredibly encapsulated confidence that you think that you can go do anything, and you have to have that. And so I really do believe that that's starting to grow in his head. And obviously he believed it, or he wouldn't have tried and found all the schools to try to walk on for a position that he couldn't even start for at high school and keep going. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to have this insane self-confidence that, like, dude, you didn't even start in high school, but you're telling me you want to go play D1 quarterback. That's purely in your head that you think you can do it because nobody else did besides your mom and dad. Like, I love you, but you know what I'm saying? So I completely
I relate
agree.
to that because I'm 5'8", and I'm like, there's no reason for me to be able to dunk a ball on the goalpost, but I'm going to try it anyway because I believe I can do it. And sure enough, hey, turns out I can. I used to be able to.
That's right. But no, it's a great question.
I think some of that, also back to what Nathan was talking about at the beginning, the carrying over of the confidence helps whenever you're coming over with Morris, whenever you're coming over with Brophy, whenever you're coming over with Miles Coleman and Wyatt Young. And then on top of that, I don't think that Chris Barnes or Justin Bowick, I think they would have been playing plenty at North Texas last season, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't think that they were worse than many other North Texas receivers. So I think that helps in that confidence that he's got, some familiar faces around him, and then the faces that maybe aren't too familiar are Chris Barnes, who's running a 4.2, and Justin Bowick, who's 6'5".
Agreed.
One last note on this, and I just want to tell you, like, how important this is for the success of Oklahoma State football, like this position and him making the jump. So Caden McFarland on Twitter had this stat. It says, going back to 2005, Oklahoma State is 111 and 36, which is 75.5%, with these 4 quarterbacks: Zach Robinson, Brandon Whedon, Mason Rudolph, and Spencer Sanders. With anybody else, the record is 59 and 63. is 48.3%. So it is imperative that he makes the jump. And I think that's why it's such an important question going into camp.
Clint Shelf's probably holding that 59 on his back too. Clint Shelf's definitely got the lion's share of those.
Dang, that's good. Good call. All right, question 3. It's a simple one. Who is RB2? Marshall?
I've got no idea. I've got, frankly, no idea whatsoever. Here's the guys that I think it's among. I think it is among Trey Page, the Tarleton State transfer. I think it is among, I still need to look up the pronunciation guide, but Io Adaye is how I'm going to go with it today. The James Madison transfer, he was at North Texas in the 2023 season, which was Morris's first year. And then the last guy I've got written down is Katie Jones. I don't think that Katie Jones, Morris was asked about Jones at Big 12 Media Days, and he mentioned, like, 5 for 5. These guys aren't redshirting anymore, so it sounds like Katie's going to get some burn on special teams for sure to start. I don't know that he's going to be taking handoffs right away. I think that is something that he can sort of work into. Like we mentioned, I'm doing those watchbacks of North Texas season. I'm 2 games in, and in game 2, overtime thriller against Western Michigan, and Caleb Hawkins didn't touch the field. He's a freshman, and not to say that Katie Jones is going to turn into Caleb Hawkins this year, but in terms of being RB2, I could see him building up to that maybe by the end of the season. I don't know. The Adaye and Page thing is sort of interesting because Adaye he was the leading rusher at North Texas in 2023, had over 1,000 yards, but he hasn't played a ton the past 2 years at James Madison, whereas Trey Page played at Tarleton State, had a really good season at Tarleton State, but it's Tarleton State, So it's like I'm not exactly sure how to balance those two. They're similar body types. Trey Page is 5'8", 184. Adaye is 5'7", 194. So similar there. But I think one of those guys is sort of going to be the lightning to Caleb Hawkins' thunder, and it's honestly it's running back, so probably both of those guys are going to play plenty. But like who really separates himself as getting the second most amount of carries, I'm not sure.
Well, I think we got to call out maybe this PFF college tweet, which puts Trey Page as 4th best returning in the Big 12. So that's going to weigh into something on there.
What does Tarleton State mean? I don't know.
It's an important question. I think it's kind of an overlooked question going into the season because everyone's so high on Hawkins. But we know inherently the running back position is a position of attrition. And, we've seen it even with our big bodied backs, Ollie would get dinged up, or, everybody loved his antics of laying down on the ground for a while, and they had to bring the cart out for him, and then he's in 3 plays later.
Sprint over to the medicine bike, ride it for a second, then run back on the field.
That's right. But you would have to think that like Io might have the leg up just because he knows the staff, he knows the coaches, he knows everybody, he knows what's expected. But I mean, I know it's Tarleton State, man, but you put on Trey Page's tape, and that dude is explosive. And they brought it, and they also, you didn't mention them, but you brought in a guy like William Mason, who was at UCO and was just an extremely productive 5'11", 226 pound inside runner. You know what I mean? So I think some of it is going to be like, where are you at on the field? What are the sets that we have? Are we going with the 2-back? Are we going just straight up coming in? I think it's multiple, and you brought it up, Marshall. I think they're all a little bit different. And so I think that's going to kind of, even what kind of defense are we running into? Is it something where you need to get to the edge? Is that a Trey Page? Is that, I don't know. I would assume Io probably came into spring ball with a bit of a lead just because of familiarity, but that's a long time ago. You've had a long time now. And I would imagine that that's something that needs to be figured out, and the coaches really want to learn that.
Yeah, whenever the roster first got put together, I definitely in my head had Io as RB2 just because of that familiarity that you mentioned. But as we've sort of gotten closer and I've watched a little bit more Trey Page, I'm like, do I fall in love with FCS tape again? I don't know.
Do we know anything about their pass catching ability out of the backfield between any of these guys? Because I think that's going to play a big factor in this as well, because even if they're not there, there's a lot of ways to do it for RB2, but a lot of times what you see is, they'll bring him in on 3rd down and they'll be running routes. Sometimes they'll be expected to block. So hopefully some of these guys, smaller bodies, are able to pass protect well as well. But any insight into that, Marshall? Have you heard anything?
Well, just looking back at stats, Io hadn't caught a ton of footballs. He even in that year where he rushed for more than 1,000 yards, he caught 7 passes. That was the most passes he's caught in a season. I'm trying to look up Trey Page's now, but it's
He
FCS, so
didn't
it's
he
not
hadn't
Football
yeah,
Reference.
he hadn't caught a whole lot either. But it doesn't always mean at that position that they can't, because not everybody loves to throw to the running back, and not everybody utilizes them in different ways. So while I agree, Justin, I think that's a really good call out. Without knowing the offensive style, and was he just not a running back at all that got thrown to? I mean, I personally don't think we threw to Ollie Gordon enough, right? I thought he had fantastic hands. He does, and we did not give him near enough chances to beat linebackers one on one. That's on us. That doesn't mean Ollie can't do it, right? And so I think that's a good thought, because this offense clearly does, or at least Caleb clearly does, catch the football quite a bit, and so that may be a defining factor.
Before I start thinking too much about the deadly combination of Eric Morris and Ollie Gordon and what could have been, I'm going to go on to question 4. So, can OSU stop the run? Nathan, I want to get your thoughts on this one first.
I mean, I know Marshall's going to share some numbers with you here in just a little bit, and it's jarring what we've lived through the last handful of years. But we talked about it with the offensive line, and it's the same thing with the defensive line. If you cannot stop somebody from lining up right in front of you and saying the ball's going here and I'm going to get 4 or 5 yards and there's nothing you can do about it, you're in a world of hurt. And we've seen that over the last handful of years. And we don't have to even be elite at it. We just have to be solid. And if that's the case, that allows what we think as of right now are the two strengths on this defensive football team, which is the linebackers and the defensive ends. If the defensive line can hold up and make you at least have to count an extra body to try to come inside, or just abandon the inside run altogether, then those guys start eating. You eat up the double teams. You got Romney, you got these Wazlowski guys. Now they can cut right off and go in and make that tackle, and you're able to do those things that we saw so good with the Jim Knowles defense, right? And we didn't have a bunch of first round draft picks, but what we did is you had guys that were so good at their job and they never got out of alignment, and then that allowed our unbelievable linebackers that year to go in and do their job. And so it's such a huge question on this defense that, quite frankly, we just don't know. You brought, I think it was Jerry Lawson, I think we brought in from
Louisville.
I was New Cardinals, but I couldn't remember the school. Very, very big dude. We brought a massive human being in from the University of Washington. And so the bodies are there. We just don't know if they're going to be able to do it. And we saw that, Iman Oates, he's been pretty solid about it. And we saw this with one of these rulings, he's at least going to be able to practice at camp, and we'll see what that means. But there's some guys there. We just don't know what it's going to look like, and it's imperative that we're able to do it.
Yeah, you mentioned stats, and I just remember this because I had to, it's literally my job to watch Oklahoma State football even after they're starting to get blown out these last 2 seasons. The 2024 season, I like to look at rushing yards per carry. Just, are you getting big played? It sort of takes out the, maybe you're just facing a bunch of running teams. The 2024 season, Oklahoma State allowed 5.41 yards per carry, which was the most in program history. That's 2 plays is a first down. What we're talking here. So you obviously can't do that. Honestly, this past year was sort of a step forward in a lot of ways. Clint Bowen, we've sang his praises on here before. He honestly had that defense in, all things considered, decent shape. They were giving up 4.35 yards per carry, which is still not great. In 2023, a year that they made the Big 12 title game, 4.56 yards per carry. But the real painful one was that whenever you look at the 2024 5.41 yards per carry, and then you look at 2021, which is 2.71 yards per carry, Oklahoma State's probably not going to get that this year. This is probably not the 2021 defense. But if you could get back in the threes, aside from 2021, Oklahoma State hadn't been in the threes since 2017, and then they were pretty regularly in the threes, 2013 and previously before that. So, it's been basically since the Rudolph era ended, Oklahoma State's been giving up 4 yards a pop at least, aside from that crazy 2021 season that we all remember so fondly. So if you could find a way to get back in the threes, I think I'd feel a lot more confident with how things are going to go. But you've at least got to be in the lower fours, and dear God, don't make me look through another 2024 season.
And reminder that Braylon Rigsby was one of the guys that at the Big 12 Media Days that both of the defensive players there brought up with, like, who was the standout or something like that, which is what we need. And just real quickly, Justin, before you pop in, I was looking at the size. So you've got Iman Oates, 6'3", 317. Anai White, 6'5", 300. Nigel Farsi, 6'1", 314. Braylon Rigsby, 6'3", 285. Dominic Macon, 6'3", 309. Jerry Lawson, 6'1", 312. Valea, 6'1", 307. So it's much bigger defensive line than we've had at Oklahoma State in quite a while. We've kind of lived in like the 285, 290 range the last several years. So again, the bodies are there. It has to happen. We've got to get back into the threes, maybe low four, but it needs to happen.
All right, Nathan, I'm going to agree with you that we don't have to be world beaters at this position or on defense and just stopping the run in general. But we have to improve, right? And it's hard not to based on what we've seen. Here's one thing I want to call out that we haven't talked about yet. Greg Richmond is coming back to Oklahoma State. If you remember, he was on staff from 2018 through 2023, which includes what I've already alluded to earlier, that 2021 defense, which ranked top 3 in the nation. I'm going to read briefly from the staff directory here to talk about his time at North Texas and I also believe with the Bearcats, Sam Houston. So Richmond came to OSU from North Texas, where he coached defensive ends in 2025. In his lone year at UNT, he was part of a staff that helped improve the Mean Green by nearly 10 points per game in scoring defense, by 90 yards per game in total defense, and by more than 100 yards per game in passing defense. The 2025 UNT defense ranked among the top 25 in the FBS in fumbles recovered, number 3, turnovers gained, number 4, passing yards allowed, number 8, passes intercepted, number 14, and passing efficiency defense, number 14. Prior to coming to UNT, he coached defensive ends at Sam Houston in 2024, and his 1 year with the Bearcats. Richmond helped SHSU finish 22nd in FBS in total defense, 13th in passing defense, and 14th in red zone defense. Basically, what I'm seeing is here's a guy that knows how to coach. And there's maybe some consistency just depending on maybe recruiting and getting the athletes in, potentially injuries involved with some of that stuff. And I've said it before. I mean, it kind of hurt me in the past whenever I said this because I was talking about Brian Nardo in this case. But if you can coach, you can coach. Doesn't matter what level. And it didn't translate for Nardo, unfortunately. But we have to remember that he's not just coming from lower levels at SHSU and UNT. He's been at Oklahoma State before. He's proven he can do it. And I think that he's got something to prove, and he's going to be welcomed home with open arms. The best way to do that is to make big steps, drastically improve this defense, and I think it starts with stopping the run.
Yeah, in the 2024 season, the one that was so ugly, that it was a Nardo year, but it was also the year that they decided that Brian Nardo was going to run Jim Knowles' defense, which just really was the icing on the cake for everything going wrong that season. But yeah.
All right, last question here. Where does OSU's defense need to be nationally in terms of how good we can be? What's the ceiling, and how? Just where does OSU's defense need to be nationally? Marshall, let's start with you.
Yeah, I meant to look up some stats on where other teams finished last season, and I didn't do that. I spent all my time looking at that 2021 defense versus that 2024 defense. But
right after Nathan teed it up for you, man.
Yeah, Nathan mentioned in our little group chat last night, could they be top 50? That would be, I think that's maybe pushing it a little bit. I would certainly take that right this very second. If you offered me Oklahoma State's gonna have a top 50 defense, I would take that right now. But I think that's probably pushing it a little bit just because of these guys coming from lower levels, and everybody's coming together at this one time. I think a defense more than offense needs to be, the sum of its parts to a certain extent. It's not going to be a guy getting the ball and just, Tyreek killing and making a play on the defensive end. So that's not to say that this group's not going to, develop chemistry and could turn into a pretty good defense. But I just think given all the sort of factors of this team coming together, I think if you're hanging around, the 60s, with the offense that, I think we're all expecting to see on Oklahoma State's end, I think things would be pretty good there.
So I was doing just looking up a little bit and kind of like what would that look like, or what kind of team. Houston last year was 47th, and they went 10-3, and I would not say that their offense was special. It was good, solid, very good team, very well coached. Illinois, 46th. Ole Miss, 48. Southern Cal, 49. All really, really good football teams. Ole Miss made the playoffs. Illinois, I think, almost made it to the Big Ten championship game. Illinois has helped out too, by the way. Their offense, they don't throw the forward pass very often. But that being said, 50 might be a bit of that might be a little bit more than we can chew.
Utah was 60 last year, went 11-2, but I think Utah was at least somewhat known for its defensive acumen.
Right. Well, I mean, their defensive coordinator is now their head coach, right? Morgan Scalley, very, very good defensive coordinator. Iowa State, 54th last year. Clemson, 55th. Arizona State, 57th. To your point, Utah, 60th. I think if you can get anywhere close to that, then you're talking about something pretty special. And I don't know if we can get there or not, but I think that's kind of, for me, like the marker. Like, if we can get there, let me scroll down in here and tell you where we finished.
North Texas, for what it's worth, was 77th last year, and it is a lot of those guys coming over. Some of the guys that weren't over there were on Oklahoma State's defense, which I'm sure you're about to read a really big.
Nathan's still scrolling, by the way.
Yeah, 114th out of 134. Not good. Not good at all.
Better than I would have thought, actually.
Yeah, and Clint Bowen really turned that thing around at the end. Clint Bowen really turned that thing around at the end.
You're right. But to your point, I think, and we know that UNT improved so much, but they weren't great. Anywhere between 70 and to 60, I think would be, well, obviously, just statistically, that'd be an insane improvement. But I think if you're doing that, you're giving yourself a chance to win just about every game in the Big 12.
Yeah, and how you mentioned Illinois' offense probably helps its defense, in terms of yards per game. Oklahoma State's offense is probably going to do the opposite for Oklahoma State's defense. This is sort of, back to 2010s era Big 12 where everybody's scoring a ton of points and the defense are getting a lot of slack for it. But in reality, it was, there were professional quarterbacks all over the place. So, I think Oklahoma State's defense is going to be hurt because its yards per game are going to be a little higher because their teams are going to have more drives. It's a points per drive type deal. That's something that Kyle Porter was always such a big believer in, especially in those Wild West days of the Big 12 where maybe points per drive is the better reason to look at it. But I need to, the points per drive for Oklahoma State these last couple of years have not been pretty, but I maybe need to, look at some of those numbers and find out what a good points per drive would be for this group.
A lot of statistics being thrown out, and I'm a big stats guy myself. But they don't have to be 50s, 60s for this to be a special season. I don't remember what Oklahoma State ended up with in 2011, but if you remember, they were very much bend but don't break. So they gave up a lot and then just didn't really give up points, and they led the nation in turnovers. So if Oklahoma State can do something like that this year, maybe the numbers don't have to add up to be, hey, we're looking at this for it to be, a special season. So there's something to keep in mind. But
OSU was 61 in 2011. 61.
Well, okay, fine. Prove my point then on the opposite. I was thinking, honestly, that we were probably hovering around like 75 or something like that. But
I think, Justin, to your point, that we got out in front of a lot of people, and that allows defenses to play certain ways. And I think that's one way that this offense can help our defense. As you put pressure, you get up 14, 17, 3, you know, it's easy to say, like, stay patient, got to run the ball, got to do these things. You got to be pretty worried if this off, you know what I'm saying? So there's certain ways. We talked about how Illinois, we joke that Illinois helps their defense because they just turn around and hand it off 55 times a game. Brett Bielema has been doing that for a decade plus. Well, it can be inverse too, because if you let a team get out in front that can really light it up, then you have to start taking chances. Then you have to start doing these things. And then the defensive ends can really start getting, their games can start playing. You can start playing games and you can start doing these things if you're not worried about cutbacks or it all works together. Everybody knows that watches football. So it can help. And Coach Morse loves to run the football, and that helps more than anything. So it can happen.
OSU in 2017, by the way, 85th.
Okay, well there you go. Just want to bring up Mason Rudolph
That
one more time before we.
That quarterback must have been really good.
Oh my goodness! All right, I get it. Propaganda for Mason Rudolph.
Well, there's only one Big 12 championship, so I don't know what to tell you.
Ooh. Let's change that.
We can't continue this, but I've got ammunition ready.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to take a minute to talk about something that's important to what we're doing here. Marshall, you wrote a piece this week about PFB and how people can support the site. I think a lot of people maybe don't realize how much work goes into covering Oklahoma State year round. So can you tell us what's PFB doing now this season and how our listeners can help?
Yeah, so this is always like the most awkward part of the job, probably because I went to school for sports media and not like business or anything. Like, so this always just feels super awkward to me. But we plug it in here all the time. Subscribe to BFB Plus. I'm doing an even bigger deal than what I have been doing. A year's subscription is now $50. I'll link it in the description. You get access to the forum. It helps me out a ton. I don't know if you guys have looked at the travel schedule this year. There are a lot of games that are flight trips more than drive trips, which is certainly less than ideal whenever you're just trying to get to them. But there's that. There's advertising, with us. That would obviously be great. You could have an advertisement here. We could be reading about. We would have done it earlier in the show, but we would have read about your company right here. You can email me, just message on this. You can find me if you'd like to do that. Got all sorts of sponsorships available for some of the different content that we do. So yeah, and then also just like keep reading, keep listening. You don't know how much that sort of stuff helps. So yeah, it always feels super awkward, but it's sort of there's that time of year. It's football season. Let's get excited about it.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. If you would please like, share, and subscribe to show your support. Subscribe to PFB Plus. Anybody wants to advertise, we've got all kinds of stuff for you coming up for this new season, full of excitement, full of wonder for now, but we're about to find out. So keep those pistols firing and remember to reload. Go Pokes.